Pressure doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. Most people panic not because the situation is hard, but because their mind was never trained for pressure. The Stoics lived through wars, exile, betrayal, and loss. Yet they believe that calm is not a personality trait. It's a skill. In this video, you'll learn the exact Stoic method to stay calm. When emotions rise, when fear appears, and when everything feels out of control. Because if you can control your mind under pressure, you can control your life. Throughout the corridors of human history, there exists a profound paradox that has consistently defined the trajectory of individual lives and entire civilizations. Those who master the art of remaining calm under pressure often achieve what others deem impossible, while those who succumb to the tempest of their emotions find themselves perpetually adrift in a sea of chaos. This fundamental truth, recognized by ancient philosophers and validated by modern neuroscience, reveals that our capacity to maintain composure during adversity is not merely a desirable trait but the very foundation upon which meaningful achievement and lasting contentment are built. The Stoics, those remarkable thinkers who emerged in ancient Athens and later flourished in Rome, understood this principle with crystalline clarity. Their philosophical framework, forged in the crucible of real-world challenges faced by slaves, emperors, and everyone in between, offers us a systematic methodology for cultivating unshakable calm regardless of external circumstances. This is not a philosophy of passive acceptance or emotional suppression, but rather a dynamic system for engaging with reality on terms that preserve our inner freedom and maximize our effectiveness in navigating life's inevitable pressures. Before we delve deeper into these transformative principles, I invite you to join our community dedicated to practical wisdom. Please subscribe to our channel, leave a like if you find value in this content, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you insights that can genuinely transform your relationship with pressure and adversity. The Stoic approach to maintaining calm under pressure begins with a fundamental reorientation of our attention and energy. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who faced plagues, wars, betrayals, and the crushing weight of imperial responsibility, articulated this principle with elegant simplicity in his personal journal, which we now know as Meditations. He reminded himself constantly to distinguish between what lies within his control and what lies beyond it. This dichotomy of control, as scholars have come to call it, represents the philosophical foundation upon which the entire Stoic edifice stands. When pressure mounts and circumstances threaten to overwhelm us, our instinctive response is to expand our circle of concern to encompass everything that might go wrong, everyone who might judge us, and every possible negative outcome. This expansion of worry creates a diffusion of energy, spreading our psychological resources across an impossibly broad terrain, most of which lies entirely beyond our influence. The Stoic method invites us to perform the opposite operation, to contract our focus to the precise point where our agency actually exists. What precisely lies within our control? The Stoics identified this domain with remarkable specificity. Our judgments about events, our interpretations of circumstances, our chosen responses, our values, our efforts, and our intentions. These constitute the territory of our genuine power. Everything else, without exception, belongs to the realm of what the Stoics called externals or indifference. The weather, other people's opinions, the outcomes of our endeavors, our reputation, our health, our wealth, even whether we live or die tomorrow, all of these fall outside the boundary of our control. This is not a pessimistic assessment but rather a liberating recognition of reality. When we invest emotional energy into attempting to control what lies beyond our power, we inevitably experience frustration, anxiety, and a sense of helplessness. Conversely, when we redirect that same energy toward the domain where our power actually operates, we discover a source of calm that external circumstances cannot disturb. Consider the professional who faces an important presentation. Pressure builds as the date approaches. The conventional response involves a cascade of worries about uncontrollable factors. Will the audience like me? What if someone asks a question I cannot answer? What if the technology fails? What if this determines my entire career trajectory? Each of these concerns extends psychological tendrils into territory beyond our control, and each tendril becomes a channel through which anxiety flows back to us. The Stoic method does not dismiss these concerns as irrelevant, but rather reframes them through the lens of control. The Stoic professional asks different questions. Have I prepared as thoroughly as I reasonably can? Am I clear about the value I wish to communicate? Can I commit fully to the moment of presentation itself, regardless of outcome? Have I examined my judgments about what this presentation means, ensuring they are rational rather than catastrophic? This reorientation immediately transforms the experience of pressure. The energy previously dispersed across a dozen uncontrollable variables now concentrates on the specific actions and attitudes within our power. The result is not merely reduced anxiety but enhanced performance, because focused attention on controllable factors naturally produces better outcomes than diffused worry about uncontrollable ones. The Stoic method extends beyond this initial distinction between controllable and uncontrollable factors to encompass a sophisticated understanding of how our judgments create our emotional experiences. Epictetus, who began life as a slave and became one of history's most influential philosophers, taught his students that people are not disturbed by things themselves but by the judgments they form about those things. This principle, which may initially appear abstract, becomes profoundly practical when we examine our responses to pressure. When a deadline looms, a relationship fractures, a financial setback occurs, or a health crisis emerges, we experience these situations through a filter of interpretation. The raw facts of any situation remain neutral until we assign them meaning through our judgments. The deadline becomes catastrophic or manageable not by virtue of its objective characteristics, but through the interpretation we overlay upon it. The relationship difficulty becomes unbearable or an opportunity for growth, depending on the frame we construct around it. The Stoics develop specific practices for examining and, when necessary, revising these judgments. When pressure threatens to overwhelm you, pause and identify the automatic judgment that has generated your emotional response. A useful technique involves completing the sentence, "I am disturbed not by the situation itself, but by my judgment that." This simple exercise creates psychological distance between the raw facts and your interpretation, revealing that your distress originates not from the external pressure but from the meaning you have assigned to it. Once this becomes clear, you can examine whether your judgment is rational or whether it contains distortions, catastrophizing, or assumptions that do not withstand scrutiny. A project deadline that you have judged as absolutely critical to my entire future may, upon examination, prove to be significantly important but not existentially determinative. A colleague's criticism that you have interpreted as proof that I am incompetent may, when viewed objectively, represent one person's perspective that contains both valid observations and personal biases. This process of examining our judgments does not involve self-deception or minimizing genuine challenges. Rather, it involves clearing away the accumulated layers of distortion that transform manageable pressure into overwhelming panic. The Stoic practice of perspective-taking offers another powerful method for maintaining calm under pressure. Marcus Aurelius regularly employed what we might call the view from above technique, imagining his problems from the perspective of vast space and time. When consumed by the pressures of imperial administration, he would remind himself of the insignificance of earthly affairs when viewed from the heavens, or the brevity of individual lives when measured against the span of civilizations. This technique might initially seem like a way of diminishing the importance of our endeavors, but its actual function is more subtle and more useful. By temporarily adopting a cosmic perspective, we do not conclude that our efforts are meaningless but rather that the pressure we feel is disproportionate to the actual significance of the situation. This recalibration allows us to engage with our responsibilities seriously without the added burden of existential anxiety. A business negotiation remains important and worthy of our best efforts, but when viewed against the backdrop of human history or the vastness of the universe, it loses its power to generate crippling pressure. We can perform better when we care about outcomes without being enslaved to them. The Stoics also recognized that our physical state profoundly influences our capacity to remain calm under pressure. While they are often portrayed as purely intellectual philosophers, the Stoics maintained a holistic understanding of human nature that acknowledged the intimate connection between body and mind. Seneca, the Roman statesman and philosopher, wrote extensively about the importance of moderate exercise, adequate sleep, and simple nutrition as foundations for philosophical practice. When we face pressure while physically depleted, hungry, or exhausted, our capacity for rational judgment diminishes significantly. The neurobiological reality is that stress hormones like cortisol interact with physical states to create a compounding effect. Inadequate sleep increases baseline cortisol levels, making us more reactive to stresses. Poor nutrition affects blood sugar regulation, which in turn influences mood stability and decision-making capacity. The Stoic method for staying calm under pressure, therefore, includes the unglamorous but essential work of maintaining our physical foundation. This is not about achieving optimal fitness but about ensuring that our body supports rather than undermines our philosophical practice. Breathing, that most fundamental of physical processes, deserves special attention within the Stoic framework for managing pressure. While ancient Stoics did not possess our modern understanding of the autonomic nervous system, They intuitively recognized that deliberate breathing practices could modulate emotional states. When pressure triggers our sympathetic nervous system, initiating the fight-or-flight response, our breathing becomes shallow and rapid. This breathing pattern, in turn, signals to our brain that danger is present, creating a feedback loop that intensifies our sense of threat. By deliberately slowing and deepening our breath, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which governs the relaxation response. This is not merely a psychological trick but a direct intervention in our physiology. The Stoic practitioner facing pressure can employ this tool with immediate effect. Pause, notice your breathing, and deliberately slow it down. Breathe in through your nose for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale through your mouth for a count of 6, and hold empty for a count of 2. This 4-4-6-2 pattern, or variations of it, physically shifts your nervous system from a state of arousal to a state of calm. Combined with the cognitive practices of examining judgments and focusing on what lies within your control, this physiological intervention creates a comprehensive response to pressure that engages both mind and body. The Stoic conception of negative visualization, or premeditatio malorum, offers yet another sophisticated tool for maintaining calm when pressure rises. This practice involves deliberately imagining potential difficulties, setbacks, or losses before they occur. The purpose is not to generate anxiety but to accomplish two important objectives. First, to reduce the shock and disorientation that often accompany unexpected difficulties, and second, to clarify what genuinely matters by contemplating its potential loss. When we practice negative visualization regularly, we inoculate ourselves against the destabilizing force of surprise. If you have already contemplated the possibility that your project might fail, that your presentation might be poorly received, or that your proposal might be rejected, you are significantly better prepared to maintain composure if these outcomes actually occur. The pressure generated by these events diminishes because you have already processed some of their emotional impact in advance. Moreover, the practice of negative visualization paradoxically increases our appreciation for what we currently possess. By contemplating the potential loss of health, relationships, opportunities, or resources, we recognize their value more clearly and experience greater gratitude for their presence in our lives. This gratitude, in turn, creates a psychological buffer against pressure by reminding us of the foundation we stand upon even as we face challenges. It is crucial to distinguish Stoic negative visualization from the rumination and worry that characterize anxiety disorders. The difference lies in both intention and execution. Anxious rumination is involuntary, repetitive, and focused on imagining catastrophes without any constructive purpose. It generates a sense of helplessness and consumes mental resources without producing useful insights. Stoic negative visualization, by contrast, is voluntary, time-limited, and purposeful. You deliberately set aside a specific period, perhaps 5 or 10 minutes, to contemplate potential difficulties. During this time, you imagine setbacks clearly but also imagine your response, how you would maintain your values, what actions you would take, how you would interpret the situation through Stoic principles. This process transforms vague, threatening possibilities into concrete scenarios that you have already begun to address mentally. When the contemplation period ends, you return to the present moment rather than continuing to churn through worst-case scenarios. This structured approach harnesses the psychological benefits of preparation while avoiding the destructive spiral of chronic worry. The Stoic philosophers placed enormous emphasis on the practice of daily reflection as a method for developing and maintaining calm under pressure. Seneca recommended a nightly practice of reviewing the day's events, examining one's responses, and identifying opportunities for improvement. This practice, which takes only a few minutes, creates a continuous feedback loop that gradually strengthens our capacity to remain calm. By reviewing moments when pressure arose and examining how we responded, we can identify patterns in our thinking and behavior. Did we catastrophize? Did we focus on uncontrollable factors? Did we allow one setback to color our interpretation of the entire day? Did we maintain our values even when circumstances were difficult? These questions, asked with honesty but without harsh self-judgment, illuminate the specific areas where our practice needs strengthening. Equally important, this reflection allows us to acknowledge moments when we successfully applied Stoic principles, reinforcing neural pathways that support calm responses to pressure. The brain learns through repetition and reinforcement, and this daily review process provides both. Over time, the responses that initially required conscious effort become increasingly automatic, until maintaining calm under pressure shifts from an occasional achievement to a consistent characteristic. The social dimension of pressure deserves careful attention within the Stoic framework. Much of the pressure we experience originates not from objective circumstances but from our concern about how others perceive us. The fear of judgment, the desire for approval, the anxiety about reputation. These social pressures often exceed the actual stakes of the situations we face. The Stoics offered a radical solution to this source of pressure: cultivate indifference to external opinion. This principle sounds harsh and perhaps even antisocial until we understand what the Stoics actually meant. They were not advocating rudeness, isolation, or disregard for the impact of our actions on others. Rather, they were recommending that we free ourselves from the tyranny of seeking approval as a primary motivation. Epictetus taught that if you wish to be free, you must not desire or fear anything that lies in the power of others. Reputation, praise, social status, and popularity all lie in the power of others, and therefore pursuing them as primary goods inevitably creates pressure and anxiety. When you need others to approve of you in order to feel valuable, you have surrendered your inner freedom to external forces. Every interaction becomes a potential threat because your self-worth depends on the unpredictable judgments of other people. The Stoic alternative is to ground your sense of worth in the cultivation of virtue, which lies entirely within your control. Virtue, for the Stoics, encompassed wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. These qualities depend solely on your own efforts and choices, not on external validation. When your primary commitment is to act with integrity, make decisions based on careful reasoning, treat others fairly, and maintain self-discipline, you create an internal standard that external judgments cannot shake. This does not mean you ignore feedback or refuse to consider others' perspectives. Wise people seek information from various sources, including criticism and alternative viewpoints. However, you evaluate this information based on whether it helps you improve your virtue and effectiveness, not based on whether it makes you feel approved of or rejected. This subtle but profound shift transforms social pressure from a destabilizing force into neutral information that you can consider dispassionately. The practical application of Stoic indifference to external opinion requires developing a robust internal compass that guides your actions independently of social pressure. This internal compass is constructed through a continuous process of clarifying your values and principles. When you possess clear convictions about what constitutes right action, you can evaluate decisions based on alignment with those principles rather than on anticipated social responses. Consider a professional who faces pressure to compromise ethical standards to achieve a business objective. If that person's primary concern is approval from colleagues or superiors, the pressure becomes nearly unbearable because the social environment is pushing in one direction while some inner sense of integrity resists. However, if that person has clearly established that acting with honesty and fairness is a non-negotiable principle, the decision becomes simpler, though not necessarily easier. The pressure shifts from an internal conflict about whose approval to seek to a straightforward question of implementation. How can I maintain my principles while navigating this situation effectively? The pressure remains, but its character changes from paralyzing ambiguity to clarifying constraint. Paradoxically, by narrowing our options to only those that align with our principles, we often discover a calm clarity that makes action possible even in difficult circumstances. The Stoic understanding of amor fati, or love of fate, represents perhaps the most profound and challenging aspect of their method for maintaining calm under pressure. This principle extends beyond acceptance of circumstances to embrace them with wholehearted affirmation. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should welcome whatever happens to us as if we had wished for it, recognizing that everything that occurs is part of the interconnected web of causation that constitutes reality. At first encounter, this principle can seem absurd or even masochistic. How can we love circumstances that cause suffering, frustration, or loss? The Stoic response begins with the recognition that resistance to what has already occurred is futile and psychologically destructive. When we rail against circumstances that we cannot change, we add the suffering of resistance to whatever difficulty the circumstances themselves present. If you miss an important flight, you can spend emotional energy cursing the traffic that delayed you, the airline policies that prevented rebooking, and the various factors that contributed to this outcome, or you can immediately shift to addressing the situation as it now exists. The latter approach does not require that you feel happy about missing the flight, but it does require that you cease struggling against the reality that the flight has departed without you. Amor fati goes beyond this practical acceptance to suggest a deeper philosophical stance. What if the difficulties you face are precisely what you need for your development? This is not a claim about divine providence or cosmic planning, but rather an observation about how growth actually occurs. Strength develops through resistance, wisdom emerges from mistakes, resilience forms through adversity, and character reveals itself under pressure. The challenges you face are not obstacles to your development, but rather the very means by which development occurs. When you adopt this perspective, pressure transforms from a threat to an opportunity. The difficult conversation becomes a chance to practice courage and honesty. The project setback becomes an opportunity to demonstrate resilience and creative problem-solving. The criticism becomes material for self-examination and growth. This reframing does not make challenges pleasant or eliminate the genuine difficulties they present, but it fundamentally alters your relationship with pressure. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What can I learn from this?" Or "How can this make me stronger?" These questions orient you toward growth rather than victimhood, toward agency rather than helplessness. The practice of voluntary discomfort, recommended by several Stoic philosophers, serves as a training ground for maintaining calm under actual pressure. Seneca periodically practiced poverty, spending days consuming only simple food, wearing basic clothing, and living with minimal comforts. He did this not because he believed poverty was superior to wealth, but because he wanted to demonstrate to himself that he could manage perfectly well if fortune turned against him. This practice serves multiple functions within the Stoic system. First, it familiarizes you with discomfort in a controlled context, reducing the fear and shock that often accompany involuntary hardship. Second, it reveals that many things you consider necessary for well-being are actually optional preferences. Third, it strengthens the psychological muscle of tolerance, making you more resilient when facing pressures you have not chosen. Modern applications of this principle might include occasional fasting, cold showers, vigorous exercise, or deliberately choosing the more challenging option when an easier alternative exists. The point is not to make yourself miserable, but to expand your window of tolerance so that when pressure arrives unexpectedly, you possess the proven capacity to endure discomfort without losing your equilibrium. The Stoic conception of appropriate action, or kathiken, provides practical guidance for maintaining calm while still engaging effectively with pressured situations. The Stoics recognize that calm does not mean passivity, and that accepting what lies beyond your control does not excuse you from acting within your sphere of influence. Each moment presents certain appropriate actions based on your roles, relationships, and circumstances. Your role as a parent creates certain appropriate actions toward your children. Your role as a professional creates certain appropriate actions in your work. Your role as a citizen creates certain appropriate actions toward your community. When pressure arises, the Stoic response involves identifying what actions are appropriate to your circumstances and roles, then performing those actions to the best of your ability while remaining detached from outcomes. This combination of committed action and detached acceptance forms the heart of the Stoic method. You do everything within your power to address the situation, but you do not demand that reality conform to your preferences regarding results. This principle finds powerful application in high-pressure professional environments. Consider a physician treating a critically ill patient. The pressure is immense because the stakes are genuinely high and because the physician cares about the patient's well-being. The Stoic approach does not involve suppressing that care or pretending the situation is unimportant. Instead, it involves a clear focus on appropriate action, gathering information, making the best diagnostic and therapeutic decisions possible, communicating clearly with the patient and family, consulting with colleagues when needed, and monitoring the patient's response to treatment. These actions lie within the physician's control and constitute the appropriate response to the situation. The outcome, however, whether the patient recovers, lies only partially within the physician's control. Many factors beyond any physician's influence determine patient outcomes. The Stoic physician therefore performs every appropriate action with full commitment, while simultaneously accepting that the outcome ultimately lies beyond complete control. This combination prevents both the paralysis that comes from overwhelming pressure and the burnout that results from assuming responsibility for what cannot be controlled. The concept of the dichotomy of control can be refined into what modern scholars have termed the trichotomy of control, which recognizes three categories rather than two: things entirely within our control, things entirely outside our control, and things partially within our control. This refinement addresses a common objection to basic Stoic principles. Critics note that very few situations fall neatly into the categories of complete control or no control. Most real-world situations involve partial influence. Your health, for example, lies neither entirely within nor entirely beyond your control. You can influence it through diet, exercise, sleep, and stress management, but you cannot determine it completely because genetics, environmental factors, accidents, and chance all play roles. The trichotomy of control handles this complexity by directing you to focus on your sphere of influence within partially controllable domains while accepting the existence of factors you cannot influence. For health, this means conscientiously maintaining healthy habits while accepting that these habits cannot guarantee any particular outcome. This approach maintains the psychological benefits of the original dichotomy, focusing energy where you have agency, while acknowledging the nuanced reality of partial control. The Stoic practice of cultivating a reserve clause, or mental reservation, offers another sophisticated tool for maintaining calm under pressure. When setting intentions or making plans, the Stoics would include an internal qualifier: I will do this, fate permitting, or I will strive for this outcome, if nothing prevents it. This practice might seem like a hedge or lack of commitment, but its actual function is to maintain psychological flexibility in the face of changing circumstances. When you commit absolutely to a specific outcome, you set yourself up for disturbance if circumstances prevent that outcome. When you commit to appropriate action while maintaining a reserve clause about outcomes, you preserve your peace regardless of results. This does not reduce the quality or intensity of your effort. An athlete can train with complete dedication while maintaining the mental reservation: I will pursue victory, if fate permits. This reservation does not make the athlete train less hard, but rather protects against devastation if injury, judges' decisions, or opponents' superior performance prevent victory. The commitment is to the process, to appropriate training, preparation, and effort, while the outcome is held more loosely. The social nature of human existence requires that the Stoic method for staying calm under pressure include guidance for dealing with difficult people and interpersonal conflicts. Marcus Aurelius began each day by reminding himself that he would encounter people who were meddlesome, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and unsocial. Rather than finding this thought depressing, he found it liberating because it prepared him psychologically for the reality of human interaction. When we expect all people to be reasonable, considerate, and fair, we set ourselves up for constant disappointment and frustration. Each instance of difficult behavior generates pressure and emotional reactivity. When we recognize that difficult behavior is a normal part of human existence, we can respond to it more calmly. The Stoics also taught that when people behave badly, they do so out of ignorance of what is truly good. The person who lies believes, mistakenly, that dishonesty will benefit them. The person who acts selfishly believes, mistakenly, that self-interest without regard for others will lead to well-being. These beliefs are errors in judgment, and people acting on erroneous judgments merit education or, when education is not possible, patient tolerance rather than anger. This Stoic perspective on difficult people dramatically reduces interpersonal pressure. When a colleague acts obstructively, you can interpret this as a personal attack deserving of anger, or you can interpret it as evidence of that person's confusion about their own interests, deserving of compassion or at least neutral patience. The latter interpretation does not require that you passively accept mistreatment or fail to establish appropriate boundaries. Rather, it allows you to respond strategically and calmly rather than reactively and emotionally. You can clearly communicate expectations, enforce consequences, seek alternative approaches, or remove yourself from the situation, all while maintaining your inner calm because you recognize that the difficult behavior reflects the other person's state of mind rather than your own inadequacy. This shift from taking things personally to recognizing them as manifestations of others' internal states liberates enormous psychological energy that would otherwise be consumed by resentment, anxiety about confrontation, or rumination about perceived slights. The Stoic emphasis on language and precise thinking offers yet another avenue for maintaining calm under pressure. Epictetus taught that we should be careful about the words we use to describe events because language shapes our experience. If you say, "I am devastated about a setback," you intensify your emotional response and limit your sense of agency. If you describe the same setback as disappointing but manageable, you create psychological space for constructive response. This is not about positive thinking or self-deception but about accurate description. Most situations that we describe with catastrophic language are not actually catastrophes. By choosing language that accurately reflects reality rather than amplifying difficulties, we maintain better perspective and emotional balance. The Stoics also recommended avoiding unnecessary intensifiers. Instead of saying you desperately need something, acknowledge that you prefer it. Instead of declaring that you cannot possibly accept an outcome, recognize that you find it unwelcome but manageable. These subtle shifts in language create significant shifts in emotional experience because language and emotion are intimately connected in human psychology. The practice of contemplating role models, which the Stoics called prosoche, provides ongoing inspiration and guidance for maintaining calm under pressure. Epictetus advised his students to identify a philosophical guide, either someone they knew personally or a historical figure whose life exemplified virtue, and to regularly ask what that person would do in challenging situations. When facing pressure, you can invoke your chosen exemplar. How would Marcus Aurelius respond to this deadline pressure? Or what would Seneca say about this interpersonal conflict? This practice serves multiple functions. First, it provides concrete guidance by offering a different perspective on your situation. Second, it creates psychological distance from your immediate emotional reaction, allowing for more rational assessment. Third, it connects you to a tradition of wisdom larger than yourself, which can be reassuring when facing difficulties. You are not alone in experiencing pressure. Countless people throughout history have faced similar challenges, and some of them developed exemplary responses that you can learn from and emulate. This historical perspective reinforces the earlier point about viewing current pressures against a broader backdrop, reducing their power to overwhelm you. The integration of Stoic principles into daily life requires consistent practice rather than occasional application during crises. The time to develop calm under pressure is before pressure arrives. This is why the Stoics recommended daily practices, including morning meditation on principles, evening review of the day's events, negative visualization, contemplation of the dichotomy of control, and regular study of philosophical texts. These practices, none of which need consume more than a few minutes, create cumulative changes in your default responses to challenging situations. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition. If you wait until you are in crisis to apply Stoic principles, you are attempting to establish new neural pathways while under stress, which is extraordinarily difficult. However, if you practice these principles daily during calm periods, you gradually rewire your automatic responses so that when pressure does arrive, Stoic responses emerge naturally rather than requiring forced application. The concept of living in accordance with nature, a central Stoic principle, provides an overarching framework for understanding calm under pressure. The Stoics believe that human nature is fundamentally rational and social, and that living well means developing our rational capacities and contributing to human community. Pressure arises when we attempt to live in ways that contradict our nature or when we expect reality to conform to standards that contradict its nature. If you expect never to face difficulties, you are expecting reality to be other than it is, because difficulty is inherent in existence. If you expect to control outcomes that depend on factors beyond your influence, you are attempting something contrary to the nature of causation. If you ground your well-being in external circumstances rather than in the development of your character, you have built your house on sand that will shift with every change in fortune. Living in accordance with nature means accepting reality as it is, developing your rational capacity to respond to circumstances effectively, and recognizing your interdependence with other humans. This alignment with nature generates a deep calm that persists even under pressure because you are no longer fighting against fundamental aspects of existence. The Stoic understanding of time offers yet another resource for maintaining calm. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself that he possessed only the present moment. The past is gone and cannot be changed. The future has not yet arrived and cannot be controlled. All you ever have is this current moment, and in this moment, you can choose your response. When pressure builds, much of it comes from projecting into an imagined future or ruminating about an unchangeable past. By returning your attention to the present moment, you reduce pressure to manageable proportions. In this moment, right now, what is actually required of you? Usually, the answer is surprisingly simple. Make this decision, have this conversation, take this action, or simply breathe and gather yourself. The overwhelming sense of pressure typically comes from trying to mentally solve all future problems simultaneously or from carrying forward regret about past decisions. Present moment focus eliminates both of these sources of unnecessary pressure. This is not about ignoring the future or failing to learn from the past, but about recognizing that effective planning and learning both occur in the present moment, so your attention should remain here where your actual power exists. The Stoic concept of sympathia, or universal interconnection, provides a broader context for understanding individual pressures. The Stoics believe that all things are interconnected in a cosmic web of causation, and that what appears to be isolated events are actually parts of a larger whole. This perspective can reduce the sense of personal pressure by revealing that the challenges you face are not random attacks by a hostile universe but rather natural expressions of complex causal chains. Your current pressure point is where various causal streams happen to converge in your experience, but the causes extend far beyond you and the effects will ripple far beyond you. This recognition can be liberating because it reduces the tendency towards self-centered interpretation of events. The project deadline is not happening to you as punishment or test, but rather arising from economic conditions, organizational decisions, client needs, and countless other factors that have nothing to do with your personal worth. This depersonalization of pressure allows you to address it more objectively and with less emotional reactivity. As we conclude this exploration of Stoic methods for maintaining calm under pressure, it is worth emphasizing that these principles and practices are not meant to eliminate pressure from your life but rather to transform your relationship with it. Pressure, within limits, can enhance performance, clarify priorities, and catalyze growth. The goal is not a life without pressure but rather the capacity to remain grounded, rational, and aligned with your values when pressure rises. This capacity develops gradually through consistent practice of the principles outlined here, focusing on what lies within your control, examining and revising judgments that generate unnecessary distress, maintaining physical foundations for psychological resilience, practicing negative visualization to prepare for difficulties, reflecting daily on your responses to challenges, cultivating indifference to external opinion while remaining committed to virtue, embracing circumstances through amor fati, engaging in appropriate action while accepting outcomes, employing the reserve clause to maintain flexibility, responding to difficult people with understanding rather than reactivity, using precise language to describe experiences accurately, contemplating role models for guidance and inspiration, and returning repeatedly to the present moment where your actual power resides. The Stoic path is not easy, but it is eminently practical. These are not abstract theories but tools forged by people who faced real pressures: political persecution, slavery, warfare, bereavement, exile, illness, and betrayal. The fact that Stoic philosophy emerged from such crucibles and sustained its practitioners through them testifies to its validity and power. You do not need to agree with every Stoic metaphysical claim to benefit from their practical methods. You need only commit to practicing these principles consistently and evaluating them based on their effects in your life. Begin with small applications. The next time you feel pressure building, pause and ask yourself, what aspects of this situation lie within my control? What judgment am I making that generates my emotional response? Is this judgment rational? What would a person I admire do in this circumstance? These simple questions, asked sincerely, will begin to shift your experience. Over time, as neural pathways strengthen and new habits form, you will find that the calm you once had to consciously construct becomes your natural response. Pressure will still arrive, because pressure is inherent in a life of meaningful engagement, but it will no longer have the power to destabilize you. You will have cultivated the inner citadel that Marcus Aurelius described, a place of refuge that external circumstances cannot breach, a foundation of calm from which you can engage with any challenge while maintaining your integrity, your effectiveness, and your peace.